Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the coffee shop counter, her hands trembling slightly as she counted the tips from her evening shift. At 28, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that couldn't quite hide the weight of her past. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her green eyes held stories she rarely shared with anyone. The small cafe in downtown Portland was her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in the rhythm of steaming milk and grinding beans. It was here, on a rainy Thursday evening in March, that David Chen first walked through the door. David was everything Sarah had learned to avoid. Successful, confident, with kind eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. He wore a well-tailored navy coat and carried himself with the easy assurance of someone who had never known real hardship. When he approached the counter, Sarah's instinct was to look away, to focus on wiping down surfaces that were already clean. "Could I get a large coffee, Black?" he asked, his voice warm and unhurried. "And maybe a recommendation for something sweet? I have a long drive ahead." Sarah glanced up, meeting his gaze for just a moment before looking back at the pastry display. "The lemon scones are good," she said quietly. "Made fresh this morning." David smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Perfect. I trust your judgment." As Sarah prepared his order, she could feel him watching her, but not in the uncomfortable way she was used to. There was something respectful about his attention, patient. When she handed him the coffee and scone, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Thank you," he said, reading her name tag. "Sarah, I'm David." She nodded politely, already turning toward the next customer who wasn't there. David lingered for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, but eventually headed to a corner table where he opened a laptop and began working. For the next 2 hours, Sarah found herself stealing glances in his direction. He seemed absorbed in his work, occasionally sipping his coffee and picking at the scone. When other customers came and went, creating the usual evening rush, he remained focused but never seemed bothered by the noise around him. As closing time approached, Sarah began her routine of cleaning and organizing. She was wiping down tables when she reached David's corner. He looked up from his laptop as she approached. "I'm sorry. We're closing soon," she said softly, not quite meeting his eyes. "Of course," he said, closing the laptop. "Thank you for letting me stay so late. This place has a nice energy to it." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "It's quiet most evenings. Good for working, I guess." David stood, gathering his things. As he reached for his coat, he paused. "Sarah, I hope this doesn't sound forward, but would you be interested in getting coffee sometime? I know that might sound odd, asking someone who works in a coffee shop, but maybe dinner instead?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her heart race, a mixture of longing and panic flooding through her. She had been down this road before, had trusted before, and it had led to nothing but pain and disappointment. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David's expression remained kind, understanding. "Could I ask why? If it's too personal, please don't feel like you have to answer." Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him. She saw genuine interest in his eyes, not the hungry look she had learned to recognize and fear. But that almost made it worse. He seemed like a good person, someone who deserved better than the complications she would bring into his life. "You seem like a really nice guy, David," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But trust me when I tell you this, you'll regret ever picking me. I'm not the kind of person you want to get involved with." David stepped closer, but not close enough to make her uncomfortable. "What if I told you that I'd rather decide that for myself?" Sarah shook her head, a sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You don't understand. I have a past, David. Things I've done, things that have happened to me. I'm broken in ways you can't imagine. I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to be hurt again. Everyone has a past, Sarah, David said gently. And I don't believe anyone is truly broken. Maybe just bent a little, waiting for the right person to help them straighten out. The sincerity in his voice almost undid her resolve. Sarah looked away, focusing on the coffee machine behind the counter. My ex-boyfriend used to say nice things too. Right up until the day he decided I wasn't worth the trouble anymore. Right up until he started using his fists instead of his words. The admission hung heavy in the small space between them. Sarah immediately regretted saying it, regretted showing that vulnerability to a stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. David was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. I'm sorry that happened to you. No one deserves that, ever. But Sarah, not every man is your ex-boyfriend. How can I know that? She asked, finally looking at him again. How can I trust that you won't change your mind when you realize how much baggage I come with? David reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, setting it gently on the table beside them. You can't know, not completely. Trust is always a leap of faith. But what I can tell you is this. My only regret would be not meeting you sooner, not giving us a chance to see what this could be. Sarah stared at the card, her heart pounding. I told you, you'll regret picking me. And I told you, David said with that same warm smile. My only lament would be not meeting you sooner. The card has my number. If you change your mind, call me. If not, I understand. But either way, I'm glad I met you tonight, Sarah. With that, he headed toward the door. Just before leaving, he turned back one more time. For what it's worth, I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. And that's not something broken people have. The door chimed as he left, leaving Sarah alone with his business card and a heart full of conflicting emotions. She picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed text, David Chen, architect. Below it was his phone number and email address. As she finished closing the cafe, Sarah found herself thinking about David's words, about the way he had looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with something that felt dangerously close to hope. 3 weeks passed before Sarah found the courage to text David. During those weeks, she carried his business card in her apron pocket, taking it out occasionally during quiet moments at the cafe. Each time she looked at it, she could hear his voice saying those words. My only lament would be not meeting you sooner. The text she finally sent was simple. Hi, this is Sarah from the coffee shop. Would you still like to get that coffee? His response came within minutes. I thought you'd never ask. How about Saturday afternoon? I know a great little bookstore cafe downtown. Their first official meeting was awkward in the way that all first dates are, but underneath the nervousness, there was something comfortable about being with David. He had chosen the bookstore cafe carefully, Sarah realized. It was public enough to feel safe, quiet enough to talk, and casual enough that she didn't feel out of place in her simple jeans and sweater. Tell me about yourself, David, Sarah said, wrapping her hands around her mug of chamomile tea. What's it like being an architect? David's eyes lit up as he talked about his work, about designing spaces that could change how people lived and felt. He spoke about a community center he was working on, how he wanted to create a space where families could gather, where children could play safely, where elderly people could find companionship. It sounds like you really care about people, Sarah observed. I suppose I do, David said. My grandmother always told me that how you treat the most vulnerable people in your life says everything about who you really are. I try to design with that in mind. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. She was certainly vulnerable, certainly someone who had been overlooked and dismissed by others. Was that why David was interested in her? Out of some misguided sense of charity? As if reading her thoughts, David leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, I can see you thinking something over. What's going on in your head?" "I just wonder," she said carefully, "if you're interested in me because you feel sorry for me, because you think I need saving." David was quiet for a moment, considering her words seriously. "Do you want the honest truth?" Sarah nodded, bracing herself. "When I first saw you that night at the cafe, I was attracted to your grace. The way you moved, the care you took with every customer, even when they barely acknowledged you. You have this quiet strength that drew me in. It wasn't until we talked that I realized you'd been hurt. And yes, that made me want to be careful with you, to earn your trust. But Sarah, I'm not here because I think you need saving. I'm here because I think you're worth knowing." Over the following months, David proved his words with actions. He never pushed for more than Sarah was ready to give. When she finally told him about Marcus, her ex-boyfriend, and the 2 years of emotional and physical abuse she had endured, David listened without judgment. He didn't try to fix her or offer solutions. He simply held her hand and told her how sorry he was that she had gone through that. "The worst part," Sarah admitted one evening as they walked through the park near her apartment, "isn't even the bruises or the fear. It's how he convinced me that I was worthless, that no one else would ever want me. Even now, sometimes I believe him." David stopped walking and gently took both of her hands in his. "Sarah, look at me. Marcus was wrong about everything. You are not worthless. You are kind, intelligent, beautiful, and strong. The fact that you survived what he put you through, that you had the courage to leave, that you're building a life for yourself now, that takes incredible strength." "But I'm damaged, David. I flinch when people move too quickly. I have nightmares. Sometimes I can't sleep because I'm listening for footsteps outside my door. You deserve someone whole, someone who can give you everything without all this baggage." "We all have baggage, Sarah. Mine might look different from yours, but it exists. My parents divorced when I was 12, and for years I thought it was my fault. I threw myself into school and work because I was terrified of getting close to anyone, afraid they'd leave too. You're not damaged. You're human." As their relationship deepened, Sarah began to see glimpses of the person she used to be before Marcus. With David, she laughed more freely. She shared her dreams of maybe going back to school someday, of studying social work so she could help other women who had been through what she experienced. But progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when fear overwhelmed her. One evening, when David reached for her hand too quickly, Sarah instinctively pulled away and took a step back. The look of hurt that flashed across his face before he could hide it made her heart ache. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I know you weren't going to hurt me. Sometimes my body reacts before my brain can catch up." "You never have to apologize for protecting yourself," David said softly. "Not to me, not to anyone. We'll go at whatever pace feels right for you." It was around this time that Sarah's past came knocking literally at her door. Marcus had been released from prison early. The assault charges had only gotten him 18 months, and he had somehow found her new address. Sarah discovered him waiting by her car after her shift at the cafe. Leaning against the driver's side door with that familiar smirk she had once mistaken for charm. "Hello, baby," he said, his voice still carrying that undertone of threat she remembered too well. "Miss me?" Sarah's hands shook as she clutched her keys. Her phone was in her purse, David's number on speed dial, but Marcus was between her and her car, between her and any quick escape. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just wanted to see how you were doing. Heard through the grapevine that you've got yourself a new man. Some fancy architect type. That true?" Sarah's heart pounded. How did he know about David? Who had told him? That's none of your business anymore, she said. Marcus pushed off from the car and took a step toward her. Sarah forced herself not to back away, not to show the fear that was coursing through her veins. See, that's where you're wrong, baby. You'll always be my business. I made you who you are. I taught you everything you know about love, about life, and now you think you can just walk away, start fresh with some other guy? I left you 2 years ago, Marcus. It's over between us. It's over when I say it's over, Marcus said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper she knew all too well. You think your new boyfriend is going to stick around when he really gets to know you, when he sees what you're really like? You warned him, didn't you? Told him he'd regret picking you? Sarah's blood ran cold. How could he possibly know what she had said to David that first night? Marcus smiled at her expression. I know you, baby. Better than you know yourself. And I know that eventually. Even Prince Charming over there is going to get tired of dealing with all your drama, all your baggage. When he does, I'll be here. I'll always be here. The threat hung in the air between them. Marcus stepped aside, finally allowing her access to her car. Think about what I said, Sarah. Think about whether it's really fair to put that poor guy through everything that comes with being with you. You know how this story ends. You always do. As Marcus walked away, disappearing into the evening shadows, Sarah stood frozen by her car. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely get the key in the lock. When she finally managed to get inside, she sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, trying to calm her breathing. Marcus's words echoed in her head, mixing with her own deepest fears. Maybe she was being selfish, trying to build something with David. Maybe she should end things before he got hurt, before he realized what Marcus already knew, that she wasn't worth the trouble. Sarah drove home that night with Marcus's words playing on repeat in her mind. She parked outside her apartment building and sat in her car, staring up at the warm glow coming from her windows. David was inside, waiting for her with dinner and probably some new architecture book he wanted to share. The normalcy of it, the sweetness, felt suddenly impossible to reconcile with the darkness Marcus had brought back into her life. When she finally climbed the stairs to her apartment, she found David in her small kitchen, stirring something that smelled wonderful. He looked up as she entered, his smile fading immediately when he saw her face. Sarah? What happened? She wanted to lie, to pretend everything was fine, to protect him from the ugliness that seemed to follow her everywhere. But the weight of carrying it alone felt crushing. Marcus found me, she said simply. David turned off the stove immediately, giving her his full attention. When? Where? Are you hurt? Just now at the cafe, he was waiting by my car. Sarah sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly exhausted. He knows about you, David. Somehow he knows about us. David pulled up the chair beside her, close enough to offer comfort but far enough to give her space. What did he say? Sarah told him everything, including Marcus's prediction that David would eventually get tired of her problems and leave. As she spoke, she watched David's face carefully, looking for any sign that Marcus might be right. Sarah, David said when she finished, first we need to call the police. If he's violating a restraining order or threatening you. There's no restraining order, Sarah admitted. I never filed one. I was too scared, and by the time I felt brave enough, he was already in prison. Okay, then we start there. Tomorrow we'll go to the courthouse, and we'll get the protection you should have had all along. Sarah shook her head. David, you're not listening. He's right about everything. This is exactly what I was trying to protect you from, this drama, this danger. I should have stuck to my original instinct and stayed away from you. David was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for her hands. Sarah let him take them, but she couldn't bring herself to look at his face. Sarah, do you remember what you told me that first night? You said I'd regret ever picking you. Yes, she whispered. And do you remember what I said back? Sarah finally looked up at him. You said your only lament would be not meeting me sooner. That's right. And Sarah, 6 months later, having gotten to know you, having learned about your past, having seen you on your worst days and your best days, my answer hasn't changed. Not even a little bit. But Marcus is a bully and an abuser who wants to control you. He wants you to believe that you're unworthy of love because if you believe that, he wins. But Sarah, I've seen who you really are. I've seen how you treat the elderly man who comes into the cafe every day and orders the same coffee, how you remember his name and ask about his grandchildren. I've seen how you volunteer at the women's shelter on weekends, how you hold other women's hands when they cry and tell them the same thing I'm telling you, that they deserve better. Sarah felt tears building in her eyes. I'm scared, David. I'm scared that he's right, that I'm putting you in danger just by being with you. Then we face it together, David said firmly. We get the restraining order. We make sure your workplace knows not to let him near you. We install better security in your apartment. We do whatever we need to do to keep you safe, but we don't let him win by destroying what we have. What if he hurts you? What if a meteor hits the Earth tomorrow? What if the stock market crashes? What if aliens invade? David's tone was gentle but firm. Sarah, we can't live our lives based on what might happen. Yes, there are risks. Yes, Marcus is a problem we need to deal with. But running away from love because love is risky? That's not protecting yourself. That's just another form of prison. Over the next few weeks, David proved his commitment through actions rather than words. He went with Sarah to file for a restraining order. He helped her install new locks on her apartment door and a security camera outside. When Sarah's manager at the cafe said they couldn't afford security, David quietly hired a private security company to do occasional drive-bys during Sarah's shifts. Most importantly, he continued to be exactly who he had always been. He didn't treat Sarah like she was made of glass, or like she was a victim who needed constant protection. He still brought her books he thought she'd enjoy, still listened to her dreams about going back to school, still made her laugh with his terrible jokes about architecture. The real test came 3 weeks later when Marcus violated the restraining order by showing up at the cafe again. This time, Sarah was ready. She had practiced what she would do, had David's number and 911 both on speed dial, had a plan. When she saw Marcus through the cafe window, she immediately called the police, then called David. By the time Marcus entered the cafe, she was behind the counter with her co-worker Emma, and she had already activated the panic button David had installed. "Miss me?" Marcus said, that same smirk on his face. "You need to leave," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "There's a restraining order." "Restraining order?" Marcus laughed. "Baby, a piece of paper isn't going to keep me away from you." But this time, Sarah wasn't alone. The police arrived within minutes, and Marcus found himself face to face with 2 officers who were very familiar with domestic violence cases. David arrived shortly after, not to rescue Sarah, but to support her as she gave her statement and watched Marcus get arrested for violating the court order. "How do you feel?" David asked as they watched the police car drive away. "Stronger," Sarah said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Like maybe I'm not as helpless as I thought I was." That night, as they sat on Sarah's couch with cups of tea and a sense that something had shifted between them, Sarah looked at David with new eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" "For not believing you when you said you wanted to be here. For thinking I knew better than you what you could handle. For trying to make your decisions for you." David smiled. "You were protecting yourself. That's not something to apologize for." "Maybe. But I was also protecting myself from the possibility of being happy, from believing that I might actually deserve good things." "And now?" Sarah thought about the question seriously. Now I think maybe happiness isn't something you deserve or don't deserve. Maybe it's something you choose. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you find someone who chooses it with you. 6 months later, David proposed to Sarah in the same coffee shop where they had met. He didn't get down on one knee or make a big production of it. Instead, he simply pulled a ring box from his pocket as they shared a lemon scone, the same kind she had recommended on that first night. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, "you once warned me that I'd regret ever picking you. I told you then that my only lament would be not meeting you sooner. I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if you'll let me." Sarah looked at the ring, a simple, elegant band with a small diamond that caught the light beautifully. She thought about the woman who had stood in this same spot 2 years ago, convinced she was broken beyond repair. She thought about David's patience, his kindness, his unwavering belief in her worth. "David Chen," she said, taking the ring and sliding it onto her finger. "My biggest regret would be not saying yes." As David kissed her, Sarah could hear the quiet hum of conversation around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, the gentle clink of cups and saucers. These were the sounds of ordinary life, of normal happiness, of a future that had once seemed impossible. Later, people would say theirs was a love story about healing, about second chances, about the power of persistence. But Sarah knew it was simpler than that. It was a story about two people who chose each other, again and again, despite fear and despite the past. It was about learning that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who sees your imperfections and chooses you anyway. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they mean it when they say their only regret is not finding you sooner.